So, once again, welcome. Thank you for joining this presentation today. My name is Benedict. I'm a Kashmir Shaivism yoga and Tantra practitioner for 20 years and a teacher of these subjects for the past 10 years. Some of you may know me, some not. So, for those who don't know me, this is in brief. And Kashmir Shaivism is, for me, is one of the passions on this spiritual path. And today, what we want to present is an introduction to Kashmir Shaivism. And the idea is we're going to present some of the history, some of the background, some of the origins. We're going to tell you more about what it involves, where the tradition comes from, what's going to be included actually in this Kashmir Shaivism course. And we will do one, maybe two short practices during the course of this presentation. So, and at the end, we'll also have space for questions and answers about that. So we will make a start now. Now, the name Kashmir Shaivism, of course, comes from the region of Kashmir. And Kashmir is the area between Pakistan and India. It's now the contested region. So it's also here with the border of Tibet, the border of China. And this is where the Kashmir Shaivism tradition originated from. It started in around about the 8th or 9th century, and it was a fusion, a synthesis of a lot of spiritual teachings, a lot of spiritual traditions by the great Indian sage Abhinavagupta, who is the most well-known and associated great sage of India with this tradition. And after the 8th and 9th century, it then flourished more in the south of India afterwards, before kind of disappearing, and has kind of been revived in the past century, really, and literally more so in the last 50 years. And there's a kind of revival of this tradition. And this course is, in a way, we can say, part of this revival. So this area of Kashmir is a very, very rich area of the spiritual tradition, being in this area associated on the border of Tibet and with the mountains of northern India. Then there is a lot of rich yogi tradition, and the Kashmir Shaivism tradition that was born out of here was really aiming to synthesize and explain in much greater detail the understanding of the teachings. So not just enough, okay, practice, do this posture, do this breathing, do this meditation. It was explaining much more about the laws, the teachings behind it, the goal of it. And the origin of the goal in Kashmir Shaivism is Shiva, as in the sense of the goal is the unifying with Shiva. The Kashmir Shaivism tradition is based around the philosophy that all is Shiva, that the whole universe that manifests is contained within the consciousness of Shiva. And that in order to attain the supreme liberation, we seek to discover Shiva in manifestation and to become one with him. So this is this idea of, we have the similar idea in Christianity that God plays this game of hide and seek, that he's created this manifested world which he hides within it with all kinds of illusions and all kinds of distractions in order for us not to discover him. Whereas the goal for any spiritual seeker is to discover him, to reunite with him. And this is the same in the Shaivism tradition. The Shaivism tradition comes from what is known as the Trika school. Now, Trika means Trinity. And this relates to the triad of the three primary Hindu gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. But in this instance, in the Shaivite tradition, which are the followers and adorers of Shiva, it is that Shiva plays the role of creator, maintainer, and destroyer of creation at the end of the great cycle of creation. And that therefore, through the adoration of Shiva, through the worship of Shiva, that seeking to discover Shiva and become like Shiva, then we are able to obtain liberation through the grace of Shiva. So this whole area has this rich tradition, and a lot of the old temples up there were based around the traditional teachings of the Trika school. Within the Trika school, the three most famous schools in it were the Spanda school, which is about the cosmic vibration, the Krama school, which is about the idea of succession, of movement through time, successive sequences, and the Kaula school, which is the idea of a spiritual community seeking together spiritual liberation. So these were the three fundamental schools which gave rise to different aspects of the spiritual traditions. And Kashmir Shaivism itself is also, on one hand, can be considered as an ascetic school. On the other hand, can also be considered deeply tantric. And the worship of Shiva, and as you can see on the page here, the Shiva Lingam, this is a famous ice lingam that is permanently in residence in one of the caves in the mountains in Kashmir, becomes places of adoration. The lingam is the symbol of Shiva, the symbol of consciousness. So in all of this tradition and in the teachings, and what we'll also teach in the course, it explains in great depth the symbolism and the philosophy behind the adoration of these aspects. So the lingam, the yoni, the couple relationship, the understanding of creation and manifestation. Now, we'll go into more details about that as we progress through this presentation. But this part here was literally just to give you an idea, give you a feel for this region and its heritage, its tradition, from where this Kashmir Shaivism comes from. And so, as we said, Shiva is the heart of Kashmir Shaivism. And it approaches the spiritual path from where we are. Shiva may appear to be some kind of abstract personification of a Hindu god. But in order to reach Shiva, which is literally talking about spiritual awakening. It's talking about the awakening of the spiritual heart. So Shiva is therefore the heart, the supreme heart of Kashmir Shaivism, the center of the teachings, the center around which the tradition and the adoration is built. So it starts from where we are. It starts, and this is the tantric approach to Kashmir Shaivism, in as much as it uses our life in how we live it now. In other words, our interactions with the outer reality are the produce of consciousness, observing the reality in a form of duality. So we interact with the outside world. What we understand from the outside world gives the perception of the outside world. So we work with the outer reality, we work with the body, we work with the breath, we work with consciousness. And as we deepen the awareness of this, which you can see, we go through life, we have certain experiences in life. We seek to understand them. Why does this happen? Why are things like this? We seek purpose, we seek meaning, we seek higher purpose, in fact. And as we do this, our perception, our perspective on the reality changes. Sometimes our reality or the perception of reality we have is challenged, is confronted to see, actually, it's not like this. And then the more we start to see things from a spiritual dimension, the more the soul, or the more the heart is opening, the more the soul is awakening, until eventually we become aware of this essence of our being. And this essence of our being in the Shaivism tradition is known as the Atman, as the Supreme Self, but it's also known as Shiva, as referred to as Shiva being actually the Atman in two forms: in a transcendent form, who doesn't partake in manifestation, and in an immanent or manifested form. And this is exactly a reflection of the idea that we as individuals, which in the Shaivism tradition is referred to as an atom or an anu, we are, or we become aware that there is something more than us. We have a higher self. We have a soul, which we discover to be the individual self, the Atman. And this is the journey of any authentic spiritual path, to reveal that self. And to reveal that self means to become one with that self, to attain the state of inner unity, which is unity between the, we can say, between the material dimension and the spiritual dimension, between this consciousness and the higher consciousness, between ourselves and God, between ourselves and Shiva. And it's said that in the Kashmir Shaiva tradition, that this is only possible through the grace of Shiva, which is why we work with the adoration of Shiva. We work with following the teachings of Shiva, because the teachings of Kashmir Shaivism, which there are some fundamental teachings here from Abhinavagupta, known as Tantra Loka, which was the light on the spiritual path, and also the Shiva Sutras, which explain step by step in various sutras the different paths. And there are, in Shaivism, there are four, what are known as four apayas, four different paths. Apaya means way or path. So there is the path of the what they refer to as of the Anu, which is Anavopaya, the path of the individual, which is where we all start from, because in the reality we live in, our first perception is us as individual and separate from the rest of creation. This is the ego center of consciousness, the false I. And of course, this means that body awareness, breath awareness, thoughts, consciousness awareness, awareness of the outer reality are the four fundamental modalities of interaction of consciousness with the world. So they are the tools, and that's why you see, for example, the yoga system is built around exactly that. It's built around asanas, which are the body consciousness, pranayama, which is the breath consciousness, and then meditation, laya yoga, which is the thought or the awareness of consciousness, of pure consciousness. Now, Kashmir Shaivism works upon using the experiences of life and understanding them in a much more profound way. So it's creating life as something sacred and holy. That we see actually that everything in the world is Shiva and Shakti. Because this is also one of the fundamental important aspects of Shaivism, is that unlike the Vedantic tradition, which is much more strict and doesn't integrate the feminine energy, Kashmir Shaivism integrates Shakti as the energy the power of creation and manifestation. And not only that, but in this triad, you have the Anu, which is the individual consciousness. You have Shiva, which is the transcendent consciousness. And the bridge, the connecting bridge between the two is Shakti, which is all the layers of creation and manifestation, which is Shakti, nature, what's referred to in Shaivism, Prakriti. So this, for it says, is that everything that moves, everything that lives is animated by Shakti. And therefore it is that awareness of that Shakti and awareness of where that energy originates from that gives us the thread, creates the bridge for our consciousness to reunite with the supreme consciousness of Shiva. And that can be done in anything we do, and that's the tradition. Any interaction with the outside world, any physical activity or physical posture, asana that we do, any breathing exercise we do, any meditation we do. But then anything else we do, lovemaking, relationships, anything with the right approach to it, because it's about having the right approach. This is you could say the tenet, the foundation of Kashmir Shaivism is that we approach life as something profoundly spiritual and sacred, with the idea of unifying the two polarities of duality, the masculine principle and the feminine principle, Shiva and Shakti, creating that unity from where creation is continuously being born from and returning back to. So in the course, we will take a look at a lot of different techniques. And we go into great detail about the techniques. We go into great detail also, as we said, about the Shiva Sutras, studying the sutras to understand actually these teachings. It was said the Shiva Sutras are considered to be sacred texts. transmitted directly by Shiva and discovered on a rock by a great sage of the time. And a lot of this tradition was an oral tradition, so it was passed down as word of mouth. And because of that, there was a big scattering of the information. And Abhinavagupta in the 8th, 9th century was the first to bring this all together into one coherent tradition of Kashmir Shaivism. So, as we said, Shakti in Kashmir Shaivism plays a fundamental role. Plays a fundamental role in the understanding of this universe, this creation, this life we live. We cannot separate energy from consciousness. We cannot separate yin from yang. We cannot separate left from right. Masculine from the feminine, the sun and the moon. It's symbolized in so many ways throughout history. This idea of these two principles, these two fundamental principles that unite. And they unite actually in a very intimate way. That actually everything that is happening is a constant dance of Shiva and Shakti. Because everything that exists nothing is static. It's moving. It's transforming. And that's transforming because there is a constant modulation between the amount of consciousness and the amount of energy there. Or between the amount of yang and the amount of yin. So when we can see this in life, if we observe this enough in life, we see that actually nothing stays still. Even a mountain doesn't stay still. It may move much, much slower, which is due to its vibration. But it doesn't stay still. Over centuries, it will move, it will break, many things will happen. So this is also then leading us to the understanding that life exists in certain cycles, certain rhythms. And we will speak about the laws, the principles behind this, known as the law of 3, the law of 7. We go into great detail about these understandings. So the tradition will examine all these different areas of life as we live it within this course and put it into a profound spiritual perspective that will give us a much more spiritual understanding of this life. And if we're already practicing yoga or tantra, it will give a great widening of the perspective, a great possibility to deepen our practice, deepen our understanding and our integration on the spiritual path. If we're not already practicing yoga or tantra, that's also not a problem. If we have the necessary aspiration and interest into understanding this reality from a much more profound perspective, then Kashmir Shaivism will also provide that, which will also greatly transform your life. So the Krama school is one of the main schools, and this is actually, Krama school is also the main deity in the Krama school is also Kali, because Kali is about succession, about time, because Krama is about sequential movement, which is time. So you can see that within the Kashmir Shaivism, it's, even though Shiva is the center, it's not just Shiva we focus on. We focus also on certain other deities within here, Kali being the primary one. So the approach to the understanding, the approach to the techniques, we show this, that, for example, that we will study the 12 Kalis in the Kashmir Shaivism, which basically is an idea of the 12 sequences of any manifestation. Because if we talk about manifestation, and this is how it originates from the Spanda school, is that everything starts as a creative impulse. It started as the Big Bang, which was a big impulse. And that everything in creation is being maintained by a certain rhythm. And this is symbolized by Shiva's drum. Shiva has that specific Indian drum that has the two balls at the end, that when you do this with it, it makes this noise. It creates this beat, this also kind of metronomic beat of creation, this rhythm. This is Spanda. And this has actually even now been discovered by scientists. They've discovered a background vibration in the cosmic radiation. So this is an underpinning of this, that there is a certain rhythm, there is a certain movement, a certain flow. And you can see that this actually symbolically is even the movement that's in lovemaking. So the in and out, so the drum, a certain rhythm. So you can start to see that within these cycles of life, when you align with these cycles of life, when you align with the rhythm, the spiritual rhythm, the impulse that the spirit, that Shiva is giving you, that you're feeling in the soul, then everything flows, everything goes in the right direction. There is an integration. And you look at some people who have this, and it's like, how come everything works out for you? And then you see when you don't catch that, it's like you're trying to dance to the wrong beat. You're out of time, you're out of step. You're not integrated. And I'm sure you've all had days like that, where days where you go and everything flows and you're amazed at how easy it is. And then you have days where it's like, no matter how hard you try, there are obstacles in the way. So this is understanding about these rhythms, these cycles. The more we become aware of that, the more we know how to adjust, how to get back in step, how to get back into the rhythm. And then, of course, using that rhythm, it allows us to fulfill things to the highest and most beneficial purpose that we're aiming for. So the Kaula school was the school of the spiritual family. And it was said that the spiritual family, the bond of the spiritual family is greater than the bond of the blood family. Because a spiritual family is basically a community that share a common purpose towards a spiritual goal. Because in a blood family, even though you're born into that family, you don't maybe necessarily all share the same purpose or the same vision in life. So when you share a similar purpose, or a purpose of spiritual growth, spiritual liberation. And in the Kaula school, what was especially unique to it was that not only the Kaula school was always led by a spiritual guide, by a guru, but also the wife, the partner of the spiritual guide, was given equal position with the spiritual guide. She was as important. She was to be as venerated and respected as the spiritual guide. And so therefore this used the practice of adoration of Shiva and Shakti through the spiritual guide and his beloved of using that energy in life in a deeply transfiguring perspective, to use the energies of life, to use the spiritual energies, to use the polarity of energies with the masculine and the feminine to accelerate the spiritual transformation. And from that, many techniques, many ceremonies were developed, and we'll go into details about those during the course as well. And then the other school, as we said, is the Spanda school. The Spanda school, already briefly explained, is the idea of this, the understanding of the cosmic vibration, the understanding actually that every impulse we receive, every desire we have, comes from this impulse of Spanda. It's a very specific energy. It's known as Visaga, the creative impulse. And that basically flows down through the spiritual dimension, comes into our consciousness, and then we are seeking somehow to fulfill it. And of course, the first tendency towards fulfilling it is in the outside world. And then it's captured by our ego a lot of the time, and we take ownership of it, forgetting where it came from, forgetting where it was asking us to return to. So all of the teachings of these three schools make up elements of the Kashmir Shaivism course, and they're the fundamental three schools. We'll go into more detail about it in the course. Now, it's just a very brief introduction. So we always have this idea of the tantric heart. Every spiritual tradition is built around the spiritual heart. You see in Buddhism, they have the heart sutras. In Christianity, they have the Sacred Heart of Christ, the Sacred Heart of the Virgin Mary. In Shaivism, in Tantra, it's all built around the heart, because the heart is the unifying principle. Even how it's designed, the yantra for the fourth center, Anahata chakra, is the union of two triangles, the downward pointing triangle and the upward pointing triangle that form the six-sided star. And this shows that the upward pointing triangle is the ascending masculine energies. The downward pointing triangle is a representation of the descending feminine energies, which is giving birth. So it's also the symbol of the yoni, of the womb. And there in the heart is where you have the unity of the energies. And this is why actually all spiritual teachings, all spiritual paths, all processes of spiritual awakening originate in centering in the heart, which is also the practices of life, living from the heart, being in love. So basically, if it's below the heart, then we're caught in some inferior desires of the ego and lower. Now, in Kashmir Shaivism and in the Kaula family and in the Tantric tradition, the idea was we don't reject, we don't run away, we don't fear those desires. We embrace those desires, but transform them, sublimate them, make them holy, make them sacred, so it rises into the heart. And because the heart, in a way, is the border between the limited human consciousness and the superior states of consciousness we have access to, which in turn, as they become more energized, as they become more awoken, give us access to our soul, to our individual self, to our higher self, however you want to term it, which lead us to greater states of inner peace, of spiritual awakening. we lose the agitation of the confusion, the ignorance, the tormenting desires, the suffering that's associated with the, well, fundamentally with the ignorance of the incorrect understanding of the human existence and the incorrect understanding of the human desires. So this part of the tradition is very much focused on that. And yeah, there is some aspects that also integrate in a very, very deep and profound way the initiations actually into tantric lovemaking. It's explained there, the theory about what is the goal. You see, a lot of people make the error in Tantra that the goal is making love a lot or making love with whoever you want. And this isn't the goal. The goal of any authentic spiritual path is spiritual awakening, is reaching very elevated and high states of consciousness and aiming to remain there. Lovemaking can be used as an energy, as a vehicle to go there, but we have to have the right attitude. We have to have the right perspective. In order to do that, we can sacralize this by having the correct spiritual understanding of that desire, of those actions. And this, step by step, greatly transforms the life. Now, obviously, you all know that being in a relationship, the beautiful things are more intense, but the challenges also come quicker and are more intense. So you can see when you're working with energies, then things amplify, things speed up. This is why in the Tantric heart and the Kaula family, then it's accelerated growth. But for that, you also have to have a very profound spiritual awareness to do the right things, to prepare correctly, to go into it with the right attitude, to go into it consciously, not pulled by desire, but consciously creating the sacred space. And we'll explain all of this also during the course. So we will do now a very short meditation. So before we start this meditation, just explain briefly the idea behind what we're going to do. Very often in the course, we will use meditations that have a musical background. Now, this is because any music is a vibration. It's a vibrational field. Now, one of the fundamental aspects which we'll also speak about in Kashmir Shaivism, which is also connected to the Spanda school, is the law of vibration and the law of resonance. So we know, for example, that we've probably seen the example with a tuning fork. If you have a tuning fork that emits a certain note and you have a string alongside it, a metal cord alongside it, if you hit the tuning fork, the process of vibration causes the metal cord to also start to vibrate in the same note. So they become in resonance. So you can see that, therefore, any vibration, any energy, because energy is vibration, anything that's vibrating is emitting a certain note. And therefore, that note, as that energy hits the cells in our body, the cells in our body start to vibrate in resonance. The physical cells and also the subtle energies, the emotions, the thoughts, everything starts to vibrate in resonance. So therefore, by using suitable music, right, elevated music, high vibrational music, it can support us to vibrate, to resonate with certain states, certain themes. And this is what we're going to do now. Okay, so we'll invite everybody just to close their eyes. Sit with the spine as straight as you can. And we're going to do a very short communion. In communion, we use the term communion because it means that actually we're entering into resonance. We are uniting with this vibration. And the theme of this short practice will be the state of unison, or the state of complete unison, between Shiva and our being. So as we listen to the music, and this will be just for 10 minutes, and so as we listen to the music, we will aim to feel slowly. First thing is to relax. We relax by focusing into the breathing. Just relax, just keep our attention in the breathing. And then as we relax more, we aim to feel a certain state of expansion. And as we feel that state of expansion, hopefully, with the help of the music and the help of a good state of inner relaxation, we'll start to feel a connection to a higher state of consciousness. Something that's beyond the ordinary thoughts. So we will start this now. And this is good. We stay with the eyes closed for a moment. Remaining relaxed, we aim to observe in a detached way the inner experience, the nuances that appear in our consciousness following this meditation. And this is good. We can return, we open our eyes. So, as I was saying then, this main essence of the Kashmir Shaivism Course is about the fusion of the individual limited consciousness with the supreme consciousness, Shiva. And it explains all the actual mechanisms, we could say, behind why we even believe in our limitations, or how we even confront those limitations in the daily life. So that by understanding, we can liberate ourselves from the ignorance of the wrong perception, which means a certain practice, a certain spiritualizing of the life. So this relationship with Shiva, but not just with Shiva. This is very, very important to understand that within the Kashmir Shaivism tradition, there is no true separation between Shiva and Shakti. They are always together, always united. But as Shiva being the representation of the supreme consciousness, then our awakening, our liberation from the chains of ignorance comes through our relationship with Shiva, of the awakening of consciousness, the awakening to the supreme reality of who we truly are, and working then to remove all of the limitations and the blockages and the wrong perceptions and the ignorance that keep us trapped within this illusion of Maya. And one of the aspects that we will talk about, and which is one of the first things that we present in the course from lesson 1 in brief, and then in later lessons we go back into it in much more detail, is the Kashmir Shaivism perception or tradition of how the actual whole of creation and manifestation is structured. And it's structured in what's known as basically 36 fields of energy. Well, these 36 fields of energy are known as the tattvas. Now, these formative fields actually is what they are. They are kind of envelopes, formative fields of energy, have also been recently, if anybody has studied the work of the British scientist Rupert Sheldrake, he spoke about recently these formative fields that form an energetic field that hold creation together. So from every level of creation, from the physical creation, and we can see that, for example, that any object that is around us in this physical reality is made up of the 5 elements. Right? So it's made up of anything. It's made up of the earth, water, fire, air, in certain proportions to give it a shape and form, and then it's held together in that shape and form by a formative field. Because if it wasn't, then these molecules wouldn't stay in that shape. There has to be a formative field. So these are the tattvic energies, each one having specific resonance, each one having a specific role in creation and manifestation. And we will go through this. We'll explain this. We'll explain the Kashmir Shaivism perspective on the levels of creation, the levels of reality that comes from starting at the level of Shiva or Parama Atman. We start at the pure reality, which we then pass into a intermediary level of reality where Maya takes over, and Maya does something quite magical, because Maya is able to take what is infinite and eternal and transform it into something that is finite and ephemeral. So we go from a pure reality into an intermediary reality into what's known as an impure reality. And because of that limitation that appears through Maya and through certain tattvic fields that limit our field of consciousness, that create the limiting beliefs, the limited perspective we have on life, which form the basis of the spiritual ignorance that we have. So the Kashmir Shaivism is explaining all of this and helping us to understand and transform the perspective and to reunify that. So the course in more detail is covering a number of different topics. And in many ways, we leave no area of life untouched. And we explain it from a very spiritual perspective. And we start right from the beginning. We start with the easiest thing. How is creation and manifestation formed? The 36 tattvas. So as we mentioned briefly, this goes from the 5 fundamental elements we know. And you can see then goes through 5 senses, goes through 5 organs of action, 5 organs of knowledge. It then goes through the 3 elements of our consciousness or cognitive instrument. So our mind, manas, our ego, and our intellect or buddhi. And then at the top of there, we have Purusha and Prakriti as a reflection of Shiva and Shakti at the individual level, which exists inside of us. And this is why when we speak about in the spiritual tradition, we speak about being in alignment. Being in alignment means being in complete balance with yin and yang energies, having complete balance of Shiva and Shakti inside of us, complete balance of consciousness and awareness with energy. And then when we have that unifying principle, it creates a state of inner void, a state beyond any agitation. And this is what allows consciousness to rise, what allows us to rise to meet the higher self, and to meet the self. So we'll explain this. We'll go into the study of certain yantras. We'll start with the study of what's known as the Shiva Trident Yantra. We'll also study the Shri Yantra, the Yantra of Tripura Sundari. We'll take a look at the Sanskrit language itself why it is a sacred language and actually what it represents. Understanding, again, as we spoke about, that creation and manifestation is based upon vibration. And so therefore, every sound, we start to understand the importance of all of our thoughts, all of our words, because of the power in them, how we formulate them, because these words come from phonemes, come from letters, and each letter has a vibration. So it's like, so when you put it together, it creates a note. It becomes like playing an instrument. So therefore, this is how the whole of creation was formed. So in the beginning, it's there in the Bible, right? In the beginning was the word, the logos. It comes from sound, comes from vibration. So we explain about this. We explain, as I said earlier, the law of 3, the law of 7. We study the Shiva Sutras. We'll talk about these 4 paths of spiritual liberation. We'll also take a look at things that are connected to the Kashmir Shaivism tradition, but maybe not originating directly from there in explicit terms. Things like the Enneagram. So we'll look at the archetypes of the soul. We'll look at various 9 typologies, because part of this understanding is to understand the archetypal manifestation of creation, how we embody certain archetypes. Because by understanding that, we know why we have certain impulses, certain inclinations, why we are being asked to manifest in a certain way that may be different to other people, different to some of our friends, different to some of our beloveds. And by understanding that the differences are actually part of a unified whole, that these parts all form a unified whole, we are able to be more, shall we say, embracing of our Dharma, more embracing of our incarnational purpose. So the more that we can do that, of course, then the more beneficial it is for our spiritual growth, our spiritual awakening, our spiritual transformation. So, as you can see, there's a whole list of wonderful topics on there. We'll speak about the objective and spiritual art, the 9 rasas, so the 9 savas, the 9 artistic savas. We speak about the 16 nityas, or the 16 specific quanta, or kalas, energies of the moon. We'll also talk about the secret power of the lingam. So you can see that for whether you're following the path of Shakti, whether you're following the path of Vira, this course has topics that will really enrich your understanding and your spiritual awakening. So these phonic emanations, we'll explain the meanings behind the Sanskrit letters, what they represent, the different types. We'll explain the symbolism also of the emanation, what they represent, how they manifest. And it will also, as I said, this helps us understand more the logos and the power of speech, the power of the creative power of speech. And also the understanding actually of how mantras are formed, how to some degree what we say. Especially you see this when we repeat certain phrases, we're actually kind of repeating mantras. So we have to be very attentive. Is that mantra actually elevating our consciousness towards something beneficial or not? And you'll see that this originates in a well-known idea now that you are what you think, you are what you say, you are what you believe, because this is formed by the power, the creative power of the word, by the logos. So we'll explain all of that in much more detail to make things like this much more clear. As I said, there will be studies of specific yantras and the secret spiritual symbolism of them. and even how to do very, very beautiful practices with them. How to awaken the energies inside of you that these yantras represent. Again, the law of 3, the law of 7, which is actually where the Enneagram comes in, because it is fundamentally related to the law of 7. And that's why when we studied the law of 3 and the law of 7, we moved to the study of the Enneagram, because that's where it originates from. All of these things, as I said, just going to give profound perspective, new perspective on your life, on your spiritual practices. The structure of the course is essentially presentation of theory, questions and answers, and techniques. We will present techniques that we will practice together, and certain meditation, certain exemplifications of certain states. There won't be any asanas. There'll be no kind of physical practice like that. So the course itself is much more, in a way, originated around kind of jnana bhakti. It originates from jnana, but awakens a state of devotion through knowledge, which, if once we explain the paths, you'll actually understand that that is the natural progression anyway, from jnana to bhakti. So we'll explain all of this, the Enneagram, how it's put together, what it represents, how we can integrate that knowledge into our lives. And also within the course, periodically, there are optional exams that can be taken by you, which basically test your understanding of the theory of the courses that have been presented. Now, it doesn't matter if you take it's recommended, it's beautiful to take the exams. And the benefit of taking the exams is that if you pass the exam, you will receive a special initiation. After each exam, there is a special initiation, whether it's a mantra or a technique. And this is also enriching your spiritual practice. These are initiations that you will not find anywhere else. So, but you don't need to stress about it. It's not like you have to pass the exam to continue the course. No. Or I haven't taken the exam, so I can't continue the course. No, it's okay. You have the aspiration to take the exam because you want to receive the initiation, because you enjoy the study. For me, this course is a very, very special course. It widened and deepened my perspective on my own spiritual practice and my own spiritual life in such a way that I became more and more aware of the subtle presence of these energies in my life. And also this feeling of, how to say, this awareness of the presence of Shiva and Shakti much more clearly in my life, inside of me also, which is why I recommend it so much. It's a truly beautiful, profound, and deep course. It does require study, absolutely. And it does really want you to practice these techniques. But, you know, how you integrate it, how much time you find to practice them, it is all for you, but it is a very, very beautiful, beautiful course. So, let's say, we'll explain all of these things, all of relating to Brahmarandra, to awaken, to how the energies rise in the spiritual awakening, to the states of consciousness that we have, to the states of consciousness we have in daily life, And so therefore, as we can become more and more aware of this, so we're able to integrate a much more profound spiritual perspective upon our daily life. And that's actually in itself is a great transformation, to see our life as something spiritual rather than something sacred, rather than mundane in anything that we do, is already taking quite a step towards a transformation of the spiritual perspective. And that's why we can say that Shaivism truly is a tantric path, because it's not excluding anything. What it's doing is deeply transforming our lives from a sacred perspective, so that we are able to use every moment, every experience as an opportunity to unify this Shiva and Shakti energy inside of us, to raise our level of consciousness, to raise our vibrational frequency. So this is why I would say that it's so profoundly relevant for modern society, because one of the biggest problems in modern society is separation. And we can see it's increasing, it's amplifying. With technology, it's amplifying this separation. And the separation, of course, is that the more we actually even isolate ourselves socially from other people by being stuck on computers and things, or disappearing into a virtual world that doesn't raise consciousness, lift the vibration, by the state of shrinking, contracting, becoming more and more insular in our own bubbles, actually we're losing the connection to our soul. And we can see this even by the increasing degree of, well, quite frankly, disharmonious manifestations in society, amplifications of violence, of all kinds of strange and bizarre behaviors, which we become numb to because we've isolated ourselves. We've disappeared more and more into a virtual reality. So in modern society, this living a sacred life, living a life of perceiving life as something holy, as something sacred, creates a state of unity, creates a state of wanting to serve, to support, to grow together, to unify, even in, again, coming back to the idea of Kaula, of creating spiritual communities to grow together. So this is why it has, for me, a relevance in everything, not just the spiritual life, but actually realizing that there is only a spiritual life. The only difference is the perspective. When we realize that our journey in this incarnation is a spiritual journey, and that what we are confronted with, the good and the not so good, are all coming as opportunities, all coming as moments that are inviting us to transform, inviting us to become more and more aware of the spiritual reality that we came here to live. So with that, I've covered everything I want to present today. So if you have any questions, I guess just before this, I've explained the structure of the course. So as I said, the course, we meet every 2 weeks, usually. Actually, the first course will start next Sunday, and then we'll meet on the 26th. And then from November, we'll meet the first Sunday in November, and then every 2 weeks. Then after that, it will be every 2 weeks. So usually, yes, Sunday mornings between 10 to 12. It may run a little bit later than 12, depending on the material, depending upon the practices, but not much later. The lessons will be recorded. If you do miss them, you're only allowed to miss so many during the year. On the first 10 courses, you have to, if you miss one, it's really important you listen to them, because this is essential information at the beginning. So they will be recorded. They will be available to you to listen. So Sunday mornings between 10 to 12:30. The cost of the course is €45 a month. And yeah, I could send you details about signups for this, of how to do that, for anybody who is interested. And now, if you have any questions. No, we're all very, very happy. We have all our answers. All right then. So in that case, if there's no questions in this moment, then we'll invite you all to join me in a short moment of gratitude. So we close our eyes, we bring the awareness into the center of the chest at the level of the heart. And we offer here and now, totally and unconditionally, gratitude to the Supreme Consciousness, Shiva, for everything that was gifted to us during this meeting. All right, this is good. So with that, we will finish here. And thank you very much for this. I'll reach out to you, those who registered for the course, by email to ask if you're interested in joining the course and give you details of how to join. And I wish you a beautiful Sunday, and look forward to seeing you next Sunday when we start the actual course for real. Okay, thank you everybody. Have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.